Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Quentin Lucas, the mayor of Kansas City, and we are honored to have ATF Director Steven Dettelbach with us today. We just had an important, I think, very valuable and in some ways emotional conversation on not just the gun violence challenge in Kansas City, but the work we continue to do to make our community safer. For generations, we have had too much gun violence in our community, and that gun violence has appeared in a number of different areas. Domestic violence incidents, gang incidents, retaliation in our streets, shootings that seem in some ways random. But it's something that all of us in Kansas City find unacceptable. When year after year we continue to have an all too high number of violent crime incidents, most of which committed by a firearm. And so I thank the director for joining us here in Kansas City today, where we had a chance to talk about a few different and very important things. First, steps that he is taking, the Bureau is taking, and the administration overall are taking to invest in communities like Kansas City and states like Missouri and Kansas, and frankly throughout the country, to make sure that we can have better data sharing, to make sure that we have more investment in how we can enforce, and more than anything, working with community violence interrupters to make sure that each and every day the work we do isn't just on the enforcement side, but it's also in building our community. We're at Rose Brooks Center for a particular purpose as well, because so many of our community partners do vital work each day in making our community safer. When I first became mayor of Kansas City, Rose Brooks presented us with a very strong problem, which related to those who are domestic violence abusers who continue to possess firearms. We've worked with Rose Brooks, our city council, our municipal court, and so many others to make sure that we're getting guns out of the hands of offenders. But we know more of that work is necessary each and every day. A few things I want to note, and then I'll get out of the way for the director, our police chief, and then Ms. Kim Cox, who's a member of a family that's been affected by gun violence. Under Director Dettelbach's leadership, we've already seen an expansion of regulation around ghost guns, and his agency will play a key role in enforcing the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which did a number of things. First, creating a $750 million funding pot for states to create and administer red flag laws. And in case you were wondering, I'm asking, I'm begging, I'm hoping, I'm demanding that the state of Missouri takes that important step to keep people in Kansas City, in our region, and in our state safer. It also closed the boyfriend loophole that adds convicted domestic violence abusers in dating relationships into our federal reporting systems. It enhances background checks for buyers under the age of 21, and we had conversation about how many of our young people are shooting, are victims, each and every day in our community. Teenagers, preteens, adolescents, and it's something that we have to stop. They created federal penalties for straw purchasing, and it provides a $250 million in funding for community-based violence intervention programs. All of these are important steps in how we make our community safer. And importantly, the coalition that you see here today, our special agent in charge, our police chief, community advocates, elected leadership, everyone is important. We didn't get into this problem with just one cause, and we won't get out of this problem with just one solution. We are committed to working together, every institution in this city, working with the institutions of our state and our country, removing politics, and just working for a solution. So our kids can feel safe at schools, so our families, our sisters, our mothers can be safe in their homes, and more than anything, so that we can look at the end of each year, not in a discussion of if we're breaking homicide records, but instead talking about how we can make our community safer. With that, I thank you, Director, again for spending time with us, and I'll turn it over to Director Dettelbach.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thank you, Chief. Thank you very much for hosting us here. This group and this trip is extremely important to meet with. We are facing right now in the United States of America, and also here in Kansas City, a firearms violence problem that is urgent. It is constant, and it is dangerous. We cannot, as a country, ever become calloused to the violence that every single day in the United States takes over 100 lives through firearm violence. We can't be calloused to the notion that just this year alone, over 600 mass shooting incidents have occurred in the United States. And we can't be calloused to the reality that so many families feel in jurisdictions all over the country, and sadly here in Kansas City, that they are living in areas where they don't feel safe. For those of us who do this work all the time, for the mayor who leads nationally on this issue, for the SAC of ATF, for the chief, for the people here at Rose Brooks who work with victims and survivors of crimes every day, we cannot get used to or somehow become callous to this. That is my single biggest fear as director of ATF, that somehow people will sort of say that this is part of the world we have to live in. It's part of being an American. It is not part of being an American. It is anti-American, and it's something that we have to remind people of every single day so that they don't somehow come to just accept the violence. Now, what are people doing about it? You have an incredible example right here in Kansas City. The partnership between the federal government and law enforcement and local law enforcement and the community advocates who fight every day for victims and survivors is an example for the entire United States of America. And it produces results. Just to name just a couple, it produces results of the arrest of an individual like Bernard Manuel, who was arrested using modern NIBIN technology for a shooting into a home that had a woman and an infant in the home. A repeated felon who had a firearm in violation of law and almost took lives. And on the supply side, the partnership here is exemplified in February of this year by a case involving an individual named Charles Weston, who was running a federally licensed firearms operation, but breaking the law in doing so, and was selling conversion devices which were used to turn semi-automatic weapons into fully automatic weapons in violation of long-standing law, so that the people of the community and law enforcement would have to face fully automatic weapon fire out there on the streets when they're going about their daily lives and doing their jobs. And you can see that collaboration in something that I came to see tomorrow, which is the shoot review that happens between federal and state and local law enforcement every day, every week, when they literally go over the shooting incidents from the prior week together and come up with an action plan for each and every dangerous individual to try and make sure that individual is investigated properly and their crimes are punished. So on the enforcement side, the work that's going on here in Kansas City is what I came to see. It is a national model. The leadership that is here is something that I will take with me as I travel the country and tell others about. And that also includes the prevention efforts. I heard about Partners for Peace, an incredible effort here that you do where 26 social services organizations work together to try to create alternatives to individuals so that at that young age, Mayor, they don't get sucked into the life of violence and crime. And it's the work that you see here at Rose Brooks. I'm looking forward to the tour here, but I've already talked to the people here. Everything you could imagine for people who are going through these horrible situations. It's not just a place to stay. It's a place where you can get career counseling, where you can get social counseling, where you can have your family stay together, where you can have your pet. It's an incredibly inspirational group of people here. And so I want to say thank you very much to the leadership and the people of this community for doing what you're doing to make sure that we can never accept or somehow become calloused to the urgency of gun violence in the United States. So thank you, Mayor, for having me.
I'll just be brief. Gun violence is not a problem that is unique to Kansas City. It's not a problem that the police department can solve on its own. It's only through partnerships with the ATF, with community groups, that we can cause a dent in this issue. And so I thank the director for coming. I thank his offer of resources. I thank the continual relationship that we have with SAC Winston And I'd like to thank Rose Brooks, because it's a problem that we can work on, we can solve, but only if we're working together. Want to speak? Thank you.
Sure. Hi. As a representative of Rose Brooks, you know, it's been amazing to be able to have everybody come to the table because we know it is a group of concerned citizens who can come together to change policies and practices that will truly result in saved lives. What we agreed around the table today, that what inspires us and what keeps us going is the voices of survivors, the voices of families who've been impacted by gun violence. It's families like Kim Cox's family, and so I would really like to be able to have Kim come up and speak a few words to give meaning and to tell you why this work means so much to us.
My name is Kim Cox, and I am here to speak on behalf of my sister-in-law who was murdered by her husband in a domestic violence situation. The work that Rose Brooks does is so important to our community and to the families of people that have been killed in a domestic violence situation or just victim of domestic violence. I want to be a face to honor my sister-in-law so that people can realize this can happen to anyone, and it happens daily, and to just plead with lawmakers to make it harder to get guns if you've been convicted of a domestic violence situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a moment for questions. Are there any questions for you?
Sorry,
No, you're just looking, Mark. Any questions?
Mr. Director, does Kansas City's high violence and homicide rate, will it set us up for potentially any more of that funding, especially on the community intervention side?
As the mayor said, right, there are significant funding streams that were already available under the American Rescue Plan. One of the things that President Biden made clear is that communities could use those dollars to help recover on the violence side as well. And the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, as the mayor said, sets up new funding streams. I don't know how all of those are going to be awarded, but certainly places that have innovative programming and leadership where we can see that the money will actually be spent on programs that are already producing results, I would imagine would be something that would be extremely beneficial for any community.
you know, I don't know how this works. Have you been visiting multiple cities? Is this part of like a national tour, or is this a one-off?
The mayor, of course, is chair of the Criminal Justice Committee for the National Conference of Mayors. So he is a national leader on these issues of protecting communities from gun violence. And so we met from the very, even before I think I was confirmed, obviously, we met, but then have continued to stay in touch. And I've also heard from Zach Winston about the incredible programming here. So I couldn't wait to get here, but ATF is a national law enforcement organization. We have offices in many places, and I hope to be able to meet with law enforcement, to be able to meet with victims and survivors, to be able to meet with local leaders in many places to find out what's going on. Look, I am from Cleveland, Ohio. I was a U.S. attorney in Cleveland, Ohio, and worked on the kinds of programs that I see here. And while Washington produces important policies, the real work happens here in all over the country between law enforcement leaders. And that partnership, unless you see it happening, like at the shoot review, unless you kind of get a feel for it, for me, it loses something. So for me, I really want to get out, but I want to start with places like Kansas City where so much good is already going on. So that when people ask me, what can you do? I say, you should call the mayor here. You should call Mayor Lucas and ask him what he's doing because they have some incredible programming here.
Because, I think that a lot of people who are in the community, it's like, we don't always look around. And so people have this negativity about Kansas City, and you're coming in here saying, all these great programs, whereas people on the street are like, murder rate's so high.
Okay.
You have this broad national sense of things. Can you help me fit Kansas City into that national puzzle and how?
Sure. So one of the really interesting things that's going on here is the use of crime gun intelligence by both the police department and ATF and the other partners to try and catch the shooters. So crime gun intelligence is the use of technologies that basically take everything related to a crime gun, what's outside the gun, what's inside the gun, what comes out the front of the gun, and what's ejected out of the back of the gun, to try and build databases so that we can focus our efforts using data on the most violent trigger pullers, right? There's a lot of people who commit crimes, right? But there's a much smaller group of people who are actually trigger pullers and shooters. And what we want to do to try to, look, we have to deal with everything, but what we try to focus our resources most on those individuals because they're likely to do it again, right? You catch them for committing a shooting, a lot of those individuals will shoot again. And so, so the shoot review that you do here, working with crime gun intelligence, the information sharing that we have here, the mayor has invested and the chief have invested time, resources, and leadership in that, and it works really well. And so you should be really thankful for that partnership here and that work that's going on here. You know, the mayor asked me when we were talking, because he always wants to do more. He said, well, where else is there things going on that I can take from other places? And the reality is, you know, he's also going around the country to try to do that, but things are already happening here that I think other cities and other communities will try to copy, as they should. And I come from Cleveland, so you know, to me, to see a city sort of similar size doing these kind of things, I think it's really important. And I also come from a city where Cleveland is a city also where we're pretty hard on ourselves. You know, and I guess I would say to people in this community, you know, Kansas City has a lot going for it.
We can do one more question for the director, and then one or two for the mayor, and then we'll wrap.
Director, we talk about Kansas City from a national perspective. Kansas City and St. Louis have some of the highest gun violence rates in the country. You talk a lot about what is going well here, but what more needs to be done to get those rates down?
Well, so the problem of gun violence is a multifaceted problem. What I always say is police and law enforcement didn't create the gun violence problem. It's not right to think that they're going to solve it alone. So the kind of things that we need to do to resolve or improve the gun violence program, I compare it to a three-legged stool. The three legs of the stool are enforcement, that's what we've been talking about, but also the other ones are prevention and reentry. And the reason I call it a three-legged stool is because if you don't have all three efforts going, the stool will fall over. So for people who say, yes, we can't have enforcement, we shouldn't do enforcement, I don't think that's correct. But for people who say the only thing we need to do is enforcement, that's not right either. We need to invest in prevention programs like the Partners for Peace program, and we need to invest in reentry so that individuals returning to the community, if we can drive down the recidivism rate even a little bit, we can actually improve the crime rate. So all three of those efforts are necessary in order to do, and that involves things that are beyond the people who are in law enforcement. It involves improving our education system, right? It involves making sure that people have jobs, supporting people who are undergoing personal crises, whether they're health crises or mental health crises. All of these things have to be done together, and people who say it's one or the other, I think are really missing the boat. It's an all of the above, all hands on deck crisis that we have to work together to respond to.
Any other questions for him? I'll just say this briefly to Betsy's question. You asked why Kansas City? And I think one of the things that is important for all of us and what we've talked about today, and we appreciate the director's attention in connection with it, is that we have to be creative. We have to be among the most innovative cities and communities in the country in terms of how we're addressing violent crime. And that's why you've seen us not just visit with the director today, but previously myself and Chief Mabin went to the White House, meeting with the President and the Attorney General on violent crime safety solutions. We'll continue to try to work on that until this city is safer. We understand that there are many who say maybe it will never change. It's been like this, it actually has been like this since I was a kid. But for me, first of all, we can't give up. We can't stop, and we will continue to work with every resource we have possible. So we will continue to be aggressive on grants to make sure that we can support not just law enforcement, but our violence prevention initiatives. We'll continue to look at information sharing in spite of whatever gets passed in the Missouri legislature. We will do the work that we can to make sure we can keep law enforcement safe by making sure there's information sharing between ATF, FBI, local law enforcement, and doing that to the fullest extent possible. And so for us, this is more of a, I guess, a continuation of an effort to make a stronger and safer community. Because no one's standing up here and nobody in our community will give up until we do address our violent crime numbers, our homicide numbers, and make sure that we're seeing a trend that we want to see of declining homicides each year and a declining number of shootings. With that, thank you all so much for being here. All right.
Thank you, Mayor.